In this clip, I'm going to show you how to repair a cable or attach two segments of cable together. This may be necessary if you need to repair a switch or repair work you've done on an adapted toy, or maybe you are splicing in a switch jack on a cable to wiring existing within a toy already. So thankfully, I happen to have a switch here where the cable has just become damaged. Oh, look at that. It's damaged. So we're going to need to connect these back together. When you have a cable that is broken, first thing you need to do is cut away any frayed or damaged part where the issue is occurring, and try to have the cable nice and even as well to work with, like so. Now I'm going to take my knife, and as seen in other videos I've demonstrated, we're going to cut right down the middle between the two wires that make up this cable, like so. And I'm going to pull these apart until we get about an inch or so to work with, maybe even slightly more, and you'll see why that's important in a little bit. And then, as seen with the other videos, to continue to prep these cables to repair them, I'm going to again cut off about 1 centimeter of the shielding around each wire. And we know that this wire looks to be like 20 gauge, close enough. So there we go, nice and easy. Generally speaking, about 1 centimeter is pretty good there. Now, sometimes when you've got a damaged cable, when you get into the wire, if it's been exposed for a while, you might see some green that has developed on the copper, and that's nasty. We don't want that. So try to cut back a little further until you've removed all of that. Okay, those are nice and clean, twisted together. And as seen before, I'm going to tin these, applying a little solder to each end, so that when I work with them to connect the cable in a little bit, it will be much more effective and easy to connect them. So I've got my soldering iron and my solder, and as seen before, I apply the heat on one side, bring the solder from the other side, and it takes just a moment for that solder to get sucked right into the cable wires. There we go. One side is done. Now, take that, set it to the side for a moment. I'll do the same work on the other side of our broken cable. And as with most things, the more frequently you do this, you'll get faster and faster. Don't try to rush things farther than you really feel comfortable with. You are dealing with heat, sharp edges, and you don't want to hurt yourself. Okay. There we go. That looks good. Let's solder tin this side. Somebody asked me a little bit ago, when you're soldering, do you need to clean off your tip, whether it's with a sponge or in one of the little copper buckets, every time after you do a solder? The answer is absolutely no, you do not. You know, you'll kind of be able to tell, oh, again, I'm developing a little glob on there, or maybe you can see there's a little flux resin on there. that's burning away. You know, it's nice to get that wiped off. Now you should be able to see I have a pretty nice clean tip on there. That'll be easy to work with. Get a little more on there. Okay. And actually, to solder these together next, I'm going to go ahead and apply a little more generous glob of solder on this one side. And then when I attach these cables together in a moment, again, it'll be even easier. Now, before we go on to solder, and you can see these cool down pretty quickly. Yeah. Before we go on to connect these, there's something we need to add at this point. Very important. We need to add some shrink tubing. All right. Shrink tubing, forgetting to add your shrink tubing is one of the easiest mistakes to make easily when you're soldering the type of soldering that we're doing. So let's take a look here. We have shrink tubing of a variety of sizes: 1/16, 1/8, 3/16, 1/4, 3/8, and 1/2 inch. Most of the time we're going to be using between 1/16 and 1/4 size. Today I'm going to use a piece of 1/8. You can tell that's what I'm using the most, and 3/16. Okay. Firstly, after we do solder the cable together, I'm going to have a piece of this 3/16 that will be down the line, and I'm going to bring it up to cover up everything that's been soldered together so that there are no bare wires exposed. So I want a good sized piece that's going to cover everything up, even most of what I've split apart. This is probably right about the right size. Okay, so I'm just going to thread that down my line and push it out of the way so that it's nowhere near the heat later. Otherwise, the way shrink tubing works is when you apply heat to it with a lighter, it shrinks up and wraps up snugly whatever it's on. So that's great, but we don't want it to happen before we're ready. Now, for the 1/8 inch shrink tubing, we need two pieces that are going to be just long enough to cover up the actual bare wire. And I'm going to go and see if I can fit that piece. See, now I put that on there and it fits, but that's real close to where my heat's going to be. So, but I'm going to go ahead and use that length. So I need to just separate these a little more so I can push that shrink tubing down away farther from the heat. And now again, I'm going to cut a similar piece for the other wire. And I'll shove that on here. So now I have my 3 pieces of shrink tubing that I want. My larger piece that will cover everything, and my 2 smaller pieces for each individual wire. Now we are good to go. So I'm going to put my first 2 wires in place. Okay. That one should be good right there. And then I can put that there for a second. My other wire that I had earlier that we tinned, that we're going to connect to. Now, people have also asked me, does it matter? Do I have to put this one on here, or do I have to put this one? This sort of simple soldering, where we're just, completing a loop circuit, this does not matter. You can connect either one and it's not going to make a difference. All right, so I'm gonna put this wire in place. Now, this is where your helping hands are hugely helpful. So I'm going to just snug those up next to each other like that. There are different approaches you could do with this too. If you had a little more wire exposed, you could kind of twist them together, something like that. But that's going to require you to have more wire exposed, which I try to avoid. And it's generally going to kind of cause a bigger, fatter little bundle in the middle, which is not the best. So I kind of like this right here. Now, bringing my solder back, my iron back in, and my solder. So we have some solder here already, so I shouldn't need much, if any, but I'm ready just in case. So we're going to apply our heat, and I am going to bring in just a little. Make sure those stay for, these just need to stay lined up for just a moment. Okay. It wasn't the greatest, but it'll suffice. So let's take a look here. You can see now, and again, it cools pretty quickly. That's really solidly connected, right? It just took a moment. And maybe you can see too, it's nice and shiny. If this solder joint was duller, that would be a sign that that didn't work out so well. But it's pretty nice and shiny. All right, so now, I am not going to do this first piece of shrink tubing yet. I'm going to solder my other wire. It's too easy to mess up the shrink tubing if you do it early. So again, we put that in place. Line up our two ends as best as we can. And if you're having trouble, move your alligator clips closer to the front. Things will stay in position better. There, that's nice. And once more, we apply our heat and a little dab of extra solder. That's good. If you're having to hold your heat on there for a long time, that's when you're gonna start to have problems with having a clean job. So let's take a look. This worked out pretty good. So I'm pulling on those. That's nice and strong. I'm happy with that. Now I can slide my shrink tubing into place. And you can see, if you have forgotten about the shrink tubing, by this point it's too late. You'd have to go back and unsolder what you did. Now, it is true that if you forgot one of these, or it slid off or something, one piece of shrink tubing would prevent a short from happening. That's true. I like to be extra sure that there's no chance, so I put a piece on both. Now, we apply a little heat. Now, you don't need to put the flame directly, right on the shrink tubing. Just close, and, bring your heat in for a moment, pull it away, and you'll see, hopefully you can see that, the shrink tubing is really shrinking right up onto those wires. Very nice. And now, we've got our larger piece that's going to cover everything up. And that's going to provide, it's going to be cleaner, it's going to make things stronger. Yeah. Okay. And with the bigger pieces of shrink tubing, you may have to bring that heat closer. So I'm rotating the cable so I can get all sides of the shrink tubing right, to get it to shrink up well. Good. Now, that looks pretty good. One final thing, if you want to really make sure that your job is very secure and is going to be strong for future use, what I like to do is add a couple of small zip ties, one at each end of my job. That's really going to add strength if somebody's pulling on this. So you just wrap around a couple times at each end of your outer shrink tubing. Okay, if you can see that right there, pull it nice and tight and snug. That's good. Clip off the excess. Okay. We'll do that one more time at this end. Again, I'm gonna wrap it around once, twice. Oops. That's a tie in there. Make sure it's positioned properly, and then snug it down. There we go. Cut off the extra. Okay, that should be a very strong repair of that cable. I don't think that is going to go anywhere at all. And then the last thing you can do when you finish repairing your cable is to plug it into something, a tester box or a toy or something, to make sure it's working correctly. And that's how you repair a cable. Thank you.